everybody, and a special welcome to our primary audience, Dr. Cheryl Ogilvie and a class at the Tshwane University of Technology. My name is Aisha, and my co-host Prudence will be doing the Q&A today for the Share Screen Africa in Exploring Environmental Education in Africa series. So, we've already had the conversation about goal setting. It's simple, right? You set a goal and then you achieve it. But life doesn't work that way. The path, both literally and figuratively speaking, is riddled with challenges and opportunities alike. Now, somebody who knows all about this is our speaker today, Bridget Ringdahl. She has already cycled 30,000 kilometers through South America, Asia, India, and the Himalayas, and has written 2 books about the experience. In addition to this, Bridget Ringdahl holds a master's degree in environmental sciences from the University of Lund in Sweden, an honors degree from UCT, and a bachelor's degree from UKZN. In her early career, she worked as an environmental consultant specializing in GIS, but soon moved on to WESA, where she took up a role as project coordinator for the SADC Environmental Education Program. She was then appointed as the program manager for WESA Eco Schools program, which she successfully managed and grew to 1,400 schools. In 2017, she joined the African Conservation Trust and set up the International Water Explorer program in South Africa. So in a nutshell, Bridget is an earth lover, a cyclist, an environmentalist, a runner, and an animal rights activist, as well as a wife and a mother. So if excellence is not an act, but a habit, then our speaker today makes it seem, well, as easy as riding a bicycle. And so we welcome the CEO of One Planet South Africa, Bridget, the floor is yours.
Really honored to be here, and it's so lovely to see so many people in the room today interested in environmental education and people who obviously deeply care about the planet. Yeah, today is just sharing some of my experiences with working with environmental education over the last 16, 17 years. And I'm going to use the example of working with the Sustainable Schools program, because that's what I'm currently working with. And just to share with you all what kind of things work. So with everything, there's always challenges. But what I'm going to share with you today is really if you are putting these kinds of things in place, when you are doing some kind of environmental education intervention, then you're going to try and you will be minimizing the challenges that might arise. And there will always be challenges. So just starting off, who we are, we're at the moment, as I was introduced, I work for a very small NGO called One Planet South Africa. And currently we work mainly with the Sustainable Schools program, but over the years, prior to that, I've worked with other environmental education frameworks like the United Nations Global Search for Sustainable Schools, the Water Explorer program, and then also the Eco Schools program. All 3 of those were also international programs. And essentially, whatever environmental education program you might be working with, ultimately you're working towards the same goals. And I never ever see them as conflicting, but rather as supportive of one another. In my mind, there can never be too much environmental education. And why is it we do what we do? And this little cartoon kind of summarizes things quite nicely, is that I really fear for the future of the younger generation. I think all of us are acutely aware of the environmental issues that we're facing. We're hitting up against planetary boundaries. And this little meme basically shows that, you know, our children are really not going to inherit something that we all knew if we don't do something. And part of conservation, very much part of conservation, is education. I think all the students in the room today will have learned with Dr. Ogilvie that conservation and education go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. So I'm going to run through, I think it's 7 or 8 points that are key, well, I feel are key when implementing any environmental education intervention, whether it's just a once-off lesson, whether it's a full-on program, whether it's just standalone activities. But if you're working with schools, I think the key thing here is that you have to work with schools that want to. We know that in South Africa, we've got something like 27,000 schools. So you're never going to be short of schools. And currently there are not enough environmental education interventions. So I think it's really important to be selective. And if you've got a school that's keen and interested, the principal will inevitably be supportive. Also, others will agree with me that there has to be a lead teacher, ideally a couple of key teachers that are your kind of communication points and the ones that you liaise with. What I've also found is that having some form of commitment from the school. So we tend to work with schools on a yearly basis with the idea that we want it to be more than a year, obviously depending on funding and stuff like that. And so we often use some kind of letter of commitment that the principal will sign. Yes, we're going to commit to this program this year. And at the same time, in that letter of commitment, we will state what we are going to provide so that we're all on the same page. And the expectations from both ourselves and the school are looking and talking to one another. And then importantly, that I think this is really key with any environmental education program. If you are spending time in schools, working with schools, they also have to do things in between those times when you're not there. And that is really key. So, you know, you can't be going in there doing everything for them. And I know that's what often happens is that, you know, someone will have a good idea, a water saving project or whatever it is, and they'll go in and they will talk to the school and do things for the school. Whereas actually, it's never going to be sustainable if the school really doesn't start to act and do things themselves. So that's why I put that school accountability. Importantly, to have a framework. A framework, and there are many different frameworks. So the one that I'm going to refer to today is the one that we currently use, which is the Sustainable Schools Program, which is a project of Nature Connect, and another NGO in Cape Town that we've partnered with. And it's a South African Pacific environmental education program that operates in, I think, 5 provinces now: Northern Cape, Western Cape, Gauteng, Limpopo, and KZN. And it's basically a holistic action-based approach. So if you might be using the Eco Schools program, that's great. Or maybe it was previously the Water Explorer program, it doesn't matter, but have some kind of framework, okay? Because that gives you more clout when you work in schools. It gives you something to organize your activities in. It gives you like a sense of purpose and also a connection with a greater network of schools and other people who are working on the same thing. So if we look at the Sustainable Schools Program, just so that you get a sense of what it's really about, and these frameworks may differ slightly from say eco schools to sustainable schools to EduPlant or whatever it is. Essentially, we're all working towards the same goals to help or support schools to become more sustainable, and very importantly, working with teachers and learners, helping to improve the environmental content knowledge and action ideas, okay, and talk to their curriculum. And I'll talk to that a bit later, through helping the school with in-school lessons on environmental topics. Importantly, there's an action-taking component. So we want to see change, so that involves action taking. And depending on what framework you work with, there's always this idea of trying to also support teachers, perhaps with workshops, when and as is needed. What I like about the Sustainable Schools Program is that it also, one of the tools we use is to help schools to develop an environmental management plan. It sounds like the big environmental management plan that companies take on, but it's a much more simplified version. And it also gives the school a sort of a plan or a map of where they want to be. And ultimately, you could say, well, what is the whole point of any of these programs? Well, for me, all of them, and it's always been this for me, is that it's about supporting schools to nurture a love and appreciation for our planet. And that is what the world so desperately needs at the moment. People to care about it and see the value of what our ecosystems do for us, and just the intrinsic value of nature in itself. So that's the Sustainable Schools program. And what's quite nice about it is that schools pick from around 8 different focus areas. And if you look at the list there, they're quite all-encompassing. So it could be around biodiversity, water, energy, about catchments and coasts, health and well-being. Everything is covered, and a lot of them are cross-cutting. So a particular topic or project might, marry up with 1 or 2 or 3 of those focus areas. That doesn't matter. It's just a way of helping the school to try and organize their projects. And then, okay, so it was really the framework that I spoke about now. And then importantly, whatever your framework is and whatever support you're offering, it's in South Africa, I think it's really key that we speak to the curriculum. We don't need to be experts in our CAPS, our curriculum, but we need to know what's in there. And you don't have to be, I'm certainly not an expert in what is in each of the subjects in CAPS, but I have a sense of what's in each subject. Okay, and if you look at all of them, whether it's looking at life orientation, there are environmental learning outcomes in there. For example, it just summarizes there in this picture. It's about informed choices for personal, community, and environmental health. There, the word is environmental health. Whether it's arts and culture, environment is a cultural concern, and art helps to express our views. Okay, obviously, natural science lends itself really well to environment. So does social sciences. And I think it's very important that you're aware when you go into a school, if you just know a little bit about CAPS, and you can convince the teacher that that's what you are helping them to do, which is true, help them to be better teachers, highlighting environmental content that does occur in the curriculum, then you are onto a good start. And basically, the underpinning policy of CAPS is really, as it's centered in the middle there, it's about creating awareness of a healthy environment, human rights, and social justice. So environment is in CAPS. The problem is that it's kind of fragmented throughout, and teachers miss seeing the connections between subjects. So how can the idea with a framework or an environmental education intervention is you really got to think about how we can work with CAPS in additive ways. Okay, that brings out education for sustainable development, learning-led change. And at the back of my mind, you'll see in the corner there is are the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm hoping that all of you know about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are the United Nations blueprint to a sustainable planet. Now, if you are working with a framework, most of the frameworks today talk directly to those SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. So that's your work already done. So always have that in the background. And the DBE, which is the Department of Basic Education, and CAPS, essentially, as South Africa is a signatory to those 17 development goals, so too do all the government departments have to try and adhere to those SDGs. But in CAPS, we can. It's not difficult to. And if we look at CAPS, it's about content knowledge, teaching practice, and assessment practice. So if you keep those things in the back of your mind when going into a school with a particular lesson or action project that you're going to support the school with, so the teaching practice, so what methods are you using? And of course, big part of teaching and learning is the assessment. So remember also one thing about CAPS, what CAPS spells out for the teacher is that it's a minimum standard. It's a minimum standard, and environment is already in the curriculum. Remember, I've said we find it in every subject, and so it lends itself already to ESD. And education for sustainable development is therefore a matter of taking up and bringing out an environment and sustainability and social justice focus, right? And through your intervention, you can help to prevent this fragmentation that we find in the subject. So one teacher in technology might be talking about solar energy, but if the science teacher is not talking about it, not seeing the link, and the natural science teacher aren't seeing how they can work it all together. So this is the way a framework such as Sustainable Schools can help overcome those, overcome that kind of thing like fragmentation. Then the other thing I wanted to talk about was methods and how you work in schools. I mean, this is key. And we all know that we learn best when we experience and we see and we try out ourselves. So many of you would have heard of the Action Learning Framework. And this is a tool that was used by Professor Rob O'Donoghue from many years ago, or this one, which is a modified version of the Action Learning Framework that he also developed, the 5 T's of action learning. I think if you also just have this at the back of your mind when working with schools, is that if you're including all 5 of these T's in your lesson or your intervention, then you really are doing things well. So it's about encouraging learners to think. Okay, they all do know something. Talking about discussing things, planning and tuning in. Okay, deciding what to do, how we can improve on something, and then actually doing it, taking action. And then also this last one on the side here, the touch component, which is about encounters. And it doesn't matter where you start in a particular lesson. You might start your lesson or your intervention outside by looking at and observing something, experimenting and seeing something. Or you might start up by doing, for example, a litter cleanup, even though a litter cleanup on the outset seems like a fairly meaningless task. If you do that action, but then around that, you make sure that you do all these other 4 T's as well to make more meaning of the action of picking up waste. Okay, so you could do a whole lesson around that. And yeah, I think this is really key. So a variety of methods is what makes it fun, and that's when learners will, resonate with a particular topic. So just in terms of the Sustainable Schools program in KwaZulu-Natal, we've got we really work in 3 cluster areas. We've got the Northern Berg and the Berg area. Then we've got the Midlands around Pietermaritzburg and Howick, and then we have a coastal group around Durban and just the south coast. So we support around, there's 3 of us, 2 of us are full-time, and then we've got a part-time person, and we support about 27 schools. So the next few slides is really going to be sharing with you how we take action. And it's about, for me, it's really important that we are prepared, okay? If you're working in a school, there's nothing worse than someone coming unprepared. So we always go extremely prepared, and it might take us, so for example, if I'm going to work with my Northern Berg cluster of schools, it might take me pretty much 1 whole day to prepare everything for a visit to 4 schools over the next few days. So my car will be packed up with all sorts of resources. I'll have everything planned so that when I arrive there, I can run with my intervention. And then, of course, as I said, part of the Sustainable Schools program, there's an environmental management plan that we work on with the teachers. So we'll be following that. And then key is that we'll be initiating action projects that have a teaching and learning part. So we plan ahead and we come with all the materials and resources that we need. If there's anything we need the schools to prepare before we get there, we notify them as well. So this is really important. And we work with WhatsApp groups. So each school that we work with, we communicate with a WhatsApp group. So take an example of biodiversity, a lesson around biodiversity. Now, in the corner on the left there, I've written up where biodiversity occurs in CAPS. It occurs in natural science and social sciences. If you look at grade 4, 5, 6, 7, in fact, just about every subject, even from below that, grade 1, 2, and 3, there'll be some mention of nature and biodiversity in one form or another. So it's not easy, it's not difficult, let's say, to to find a link around biodiversity. And something as simple as understanding biodiversity by doing a simple vegetation survey is something that is so easy. It doesn't matter if you if your school is in a rural area or a built-up area, you can still do the survey. So I found this, for example, is a really successful one to do. So we do a survey of inside the school grounds and outside the school grounds, a simple quadrat method. And here you're already teaching learners the simple ecological survey that you do in year one in university. So comparing the grassland in the school to the one of that outside the school. And they literally count up the different plant species that they find in that quadrat and make a note of them. Before analyzing the results, then we would do a game around a grassland ecosystem. So each one of those cards the children are holding there in the circle represents an element of a savanna grassland ecosystem. So the termites, the acacia trees, the secretary birds, the dung beetles, yeah, all of the things that you typically find in a grassland ecosystem. And to see, you know, that the typical food web game where children can see the connections where you take one out of the system and the system becomes weaker. Then back in the classroom, importantly, we've had outdoor activity, fun, playing a game, discovering, finding out, and then back in the classroom, then doing the work and looking at what did we find. Well, in the natural grassland, we found a total of 32 species, different plants, and in the schoolyard, 17. And if we do the average per group, you can see it's 6 versus 3. So we can see that the biodiversity in the natural grassland is 2 times greater than in the schoolyard. And then we can see that learners did graphs, fantastic. That's part of maths as well. And then they were starting to analyze and interpret and come to some kind of conclusions. Here's some more examples of a different survey we did on through a game that we played about different biodiversity species and pollination. And then, of course, getting them to analyze. And although these children are in rural schools and they're second language English speakers, if we look at this analysis here of what one learner wrote about in the natural grassland, she says there are more kinds of grass because there's less disturbance and there's more grass where animals live. And they get more grass because there's no one cutting it down. And when you look, you will get more animals because they're living in grass. Okay, it's simple English, but you can see from that she really understands why you're going to find more animals in the natural grassland because there's a higher variety, and why there is a higher variety because there's less disturbance. Whereas in the schoolyard, there's less kinds of grass because they are cutting the grass and there's more disturbance and there are more people walking there. And when the people built the school, they obviously had to come and clear and so on. So there again, it's not so much about how good her English is there, which isn't bad at all for a second language English speaker, but that she actually understands the difference and she's analyzed that and she's understood the activity. So importantly, the writing aspect. So it can be fun, but at the end of the day, there's certain learning outcomes that the teacher has to meet. So if you can help the teacher to do those by doing activities that they can use for assessment, all the better. So carrying on with that biodiversity lesson, well, then we would say, well, okay, the biodiversity in the school grounds is quite low. What can we do to improve this? How can we get nature back into our schools? Well, and this might not happen in that same lesson, but the next time I come to the school, we plan and create a biodiversity garden, okay? And this is where, you know, you have to be willing to, you know, go the extra mile perhaps. So I would bring around 50 plants representing maybe 14 different water-wise species. And there in the classroom, we would look in groups at the different plants I brought with information sheets and get a touch and a beginning on plant taxonomy and nomenclature. And then after that, looking at that, then we'd actually go out and plant up the garden. Anyhow, so there they've planted up, and then we've made actually labels for each plant with the common name and the scientific name. And then just to expand on this idea of a biodiversity garden, why it is useful to work with a framework is that often, or partner with an organization that has a useful framework, is that often you might be able, often competitions. So in this example, this school won one of our competitions and they won 40,000 rands worth of prize money that they decided to use to convert an area of the school into a biodiversity hotspot, and use it as a teaching resource. So this was the area before, and this was when they were planting it, and this is what it looks like today. So they managed to plant up this garden and make 4 different kind of biomes, as it were. And although they can't take the children very easily out on excursions, they can actually just go into the school ground and do fantastic lessons here. And this is just one lesson that we did with them around plant taxonomy and, you know, identifying and working out what kind of plants and that kind of thing. So this is where real learning comes in and real skills can be developed. So I think it's really key to be practical. Here's another example, looking at the topic of water, but also biodiversity. And I think many of you might have used this mini SAS stream assessment scoring tool. Okay, and this is a lovely tool. I mean, so long as you've got access to a body of water, ideally a stream, again, it's a lesson in macroinvertebrates, in different animal taxonomy. It's got the practical element where learners go out. So before I've taken them out of taken them out into the field to go and do a survey of what we find in the stream or body of water. Before we do that, we do an in-classroom exercise where we've printed out the different macroinvertebrates. Okay, so there we go. You see, I've printed out cards of the different macroinvertebrates that you find, and I've taught them how to use the dichotomous key to identify each of those macroinvertebrates so that when we do go into the field to look for them, they have an idea of what they're already looking for. So importantly, and then, of course, getting them to learn about a specific macroinvertebrate, and even if it's just a simple drawing, one could call it art, or the learnings of how to do a proper scientific drawing and making a lovely poster of all the different creatures that they found. Another one linked to water, the water theme, wetlands come up in February with Wetlands Month. And wetlands are, you'll find it in grade 5 and 6 very clearly, and in other areas. But again, you can do similar activities in the wetland if you have one nearby, looking at alien invasives, clearing them out, replanting, and then, of course, doing some practical things of how wetlands work. So if you can't get into a wetland, some of you might have done this activity with your schools previously, where you get the learners to build a filter after explaining to them how a wetland works, how a conventional water treatment plant works, and that essentially that is what wetlands are doing for us, cleaning our water for free, and then getting them in teams to build these filters up and then test to see whose filter works the best. And then the fun part, okay, there's got to be fun. So this year, this was a message I sent out to all the schools in KZN, that instead of wearing, because all schools do this, they wear red on Valentine's Day, and Valentine's Day is another day for consumption and buying a whole lot of stuff that we don't really need. And kind of we've lost the plot. It is good to love one another, but we also need to love our planet Earth. So my thing was love wetlands this Valentine's. February is also International Wetlands Month. Let's wear blue or green for the love of our planet this Valentine's Day. And then it was great. Then everyone did that. Well, many schools did that. It was lovely to see their photos. And everyone got really excited about this idea of wearing blue and green on Valentine's Day instead of the boring old red. And it was just a very nice way of uniting all the schools together. And I shared these photos, obviously, with the whole schools group in KZN. Another topic, climate action. Climate crisis is upon us. And it's important that, you know, I think it's one page in grade 6 or 7 textbook that talks about climate change. and that's it. And then they learn about solar energy in another grade, and there's no connection. And there's no action around it either. So, and I think it's really important that we equip our learners with ways that they can deal with this rapidly changing planet. And we can't lie to them about some of these truths, but we can also tell them the truth, but also not make them feel fearful and show them what they can actually do. So this cuts across many of the subjects, as you can see in the corner there. And it's so great to actually make a working solar oven. So there I've got a solar oven that I use at home a lot on the left, and on the right, and we've been doing it this week and last week in some of our schools, is because right now in term 3 in grade 7, they learn about solar energy. So it's a good time to do this. And also it's not the rainy season. So your chances of having a good solar day are high. So playing games around understanding the science, the causes and the impacts of climate change, where the kids have to answer questions in teams and build up this picture, and they have fun, and then we discuss and look and see what it's all about. And then there's another game of where this boy is representing, or this girl's representing Mother Earth, and all the people around her are different polluters. So one was like a forestry company that cut down trees, and every time someone joined the game, for example, an oil miner or a metal miner or a cattle farmer, then another blanket would be put onto planet Earth to just explain and help explain how more carbon and fossil fuels are released into the atmosphere through different human activities, and that now planet Earth is getting hot. So there are different ways you can use to try and help learners to understand the simple science and things like the greenhouse effect, and then getting them to measure up and build a functional solar oven, and then to actually use it. Part of this is also, this was a nice experiment we did where we had 4 different bottles of frozen water, and they were insulated with different materials, and to see how, which was the best insulation material, and which of the 4 frozen bottles remained frozen for the longest. And another simple experiment of using science and different concepts of science to investigate something as simple as heating and warming. And then they would graph those results and measure out how much of water had melted off each bottle. And then, of course, nothing can be more convincing when you've got a solar oven there, and at the end of the 3-4 hour engagement with the school, that everyone can enjoy some cooked apple pudding and custard. And then, of course, showing them things like the Wonder Bag as well. And then, so we would have made those solar ovens. So this week we've made some more solar ovens and helped the schools to make them. And now they have to show us how they've used them in the next week. So they need to test them. But a solar oven like this, that's made out of recycled materials, boxes, polystyrene that we found at recycling, tin foil. We asked a glass company, they gave us some sheets of glass. It can actually get to 100 degrees on a hot summer day. So it's something that can really work, and it's free energy, and it's something you can do. So as part of this lesson as well, we'd also share with them about the climate change movement and get the learners to write down for a language component of how they feel. And this is really revealing as well. So for example, this boy writes, "I feel so sad because maybe we can end up having nothing in our future. The worst thing is that the adults don't care about us and our future. They only think about money. I would like to join this girl, Greta, because she is fighting for the planet. She is not doing it for herself, but for us too." So yeah, quite moving to see how these learners think and how the lesson has impacted on them. Here, Greta is doing something good, inspiring. She shows determination. "I feel that as she is the Greta of Sweden, I should be my own, Greta in South Africa. To believe that she was only 16, but doing things that should have been done long ago by the adults. She is trying to save our future. She is amazing." And then another thing of doing, well, it's climate change can be a little bit overwhelming, But again, planting a biodiversity garden or planting speckworm, because we know speckworm takes up more carbon, is just a nice activity that makes one feel that you're doing something, at least a token action, which is something. Water, a big topic, and water pops up in every grade, you know, right from as young as grade 1, and comes up again and again. In grade 5, they have to do a water audit in maths. And yeah, so there's lots of lovely stuff you can do around water. This activity works incredibly well, where the simple activity of working out how much water someone uses when washing their hands under a running tap versus under a tippy tap. And there you can see the picture on the left shows you the stark difference, 1 liter versus 100 mils on average. So it might not seem like a lot of water, but if you're a school in a water scarce area, and even if you're not a school in a water scarce area, that's a lot of water. And if you start to do the maths around that, it becomes quite shocking. So based on, say, this school of 600 learners, if each learner just wash their hands once a day, that would be 600 liters. And then you can extend it for a day, a week, a month, a year, and get the learners to do the maths. And it's simple maths, but a lot of learners are not getting to grips with this kind of maths. And to be honest, I was never very good at maths, but when math is applied in this kind of way, it actually makes it have sense, and it actually makes it exciting. So they worked out, for example, that using a running tap, they would need 18 5,000 liter JoJo tanks for 1 year just to keep hands clean, versus if everyone used a tippy tap to wash their hands, they would need only 2 5,000 liter JoJo tanks for that year. So it's a 10 times water saving, which is considerable. And it has meaning then. Well, why are we putting up tippy taps? Because it actually makes a difference. And then going through that maths, as I said, conversions, 1 liter versus 100 mils. And that's where a lot of learning can happen. And then setting up something simple like a tippy tap. And you don't need a lot for that. 3 poles, some rope, and then the learners can bring the bottles. So this kid says, learning this really opened my eyes. I'm inspired to teach people this method, and will set one up at my home for my family. Fantastic. And then in a resource school, for example, working out, or schools that have flush toilets, working out how much water is wasted simply on water being flushed away. I think of all city schools, about 50% of all the water that is used is water that's used for flushing the toilets, which actually is quite insane in a country that is water scarce. So looking at ways to reduce that by filling up bottles and putting them in a cistern, and then again doing the maths around it, where this school worked out that they would save around 250,000 liters of water a year by doing this. Significant. I'm going to stop at this point. Also on the water theme, I also think, you know, we tend to talk about water saving by turning off taps and rainwater harvesting and all those kind of things, which is really, really good. But in a country like South Africa, we also need to look at embedded water. And in fact, not just South Africa, everywhere, that everything we use and consume on a daily basis was made with water. And this is a game that we also use with learners, and it just brings up lots of conversation. So I'm going to just stop here for a second. And these are the cards that we'd often use with the learners. So we'd have them in groups, and we would share out those cards. And obviously we would have had an introduction beforehand around secret water or hidden water. And then we would now ask them, and I'm going to ask you guys to just spend a few minutes and try and match the item on the left, which is numbered with from 1 to 7, with how many liters of water you think it took to make that item. It's quite difficult, isn't it? I find this, I mean, as I say to the children, don't worry, it's impossible to know the answers to this entirely. if you give this to the teachers, they won't even know the answers. Nobody knows the answers. Very few people, maybe a few water experts might know the answers, but even then they might not know them. So what I would have done is I would have printed these out as cards, as I said, and the learners would spend probably 15 minutes or so discussing it and deciding their numbers versus liters. Okay, so the can of Coke is 63 liters. And you might say, why? Well, the aluminium can, think of what it takes to make an aluminium can. So most of the water is in the making of the can because there's a lot of mining involved. And if there's a lot of mining involved, there's a lot of water. So extraction of resources is very, very high. And then, of course, in making the Coke itself, a lot of water is used, and there's also a high amount of sugar. Okay, number 2. So the vegetables, a plate of vegetables is, one serving of vegetables is around 45 liters. I'll come back to that a little bit later. A liter of bottled water. I saw some of you got that right. That was 8 liters. And you might think, oh, that's not too bad. But just think about it like this. So to buy a 1 liter bottle of water in a shop, right? So just to buy it, right, it costs what, 15, 20 Rand at the engine garage or something. So basically what you're doing is to buy that 1 liter, you're throwing away 8 to make it, okay? You're wasting 8 to make it. That's what it actually means, because most of that water is going into making of the plastic bottle. And then what happens to that plastic bottle? You know exactly what happens to it. It gets chucked out the window or thrown away. And if it, you know, maybe if you're very lucky, it might end up in a recycling site. But, you know, it's actually doesn't make sense in a water scarce country. And at the moment, we're still fortunate enough, we can still drink our tap water. So to me, that's quite a glaring, stark, harsh example of where you're wasting 8 liters to make 1 liter. So that's quite an interesting talking point. And then, okay, I see I've got 2 3s here. I made a mistake. The jeans, the pair of jeans. Okay, did anyone get that? I think somebody might have got that. 10,500 liters. Whoa, that's a lot of water, isn't it? It's basically 2 big 5,000 liter Jojo tanks to make 1 pair of jeans. How is that possible? Well, for a start, cotton is a very, very water intensive crop. So to grow cotton in the first place requires masses of water. And then jeans, as you'll see, as you know, with jeans, you get light colored jeans, dark colored jeans, jeans that look torn on, you know, torn and stonewashed jeans and all of that. The whole dyeing process of making jeans is extremely water intensive. So to make those stonewashed jeans, or those jeans that look faded and sort of worn on the knees, they have to actually go through a whole treatment process where they literally wash them with stones multiple times. So how many pair of jeans do we really need? How many pair of jeans can you wear at once? Only 1. So it brings up these discussions around, and it's not, you know, it's not exclusive to resource schools. We all need to know about our consumption. You know, I'm not saying that a rural children, yeah, they might not even have a pair of jeans, but it doesn't matter. We can still have these discussions, no matter that, you know, how many pairs of jeans do we need? And how could we prevent clothing? I mean, the clothing wastage globally is a huge, huge problem. It's not so much of an issue maybe here, where people hand clothes down and stuff like that, but in other parts of the world, it's a massive problem. Okay, the A4 piece of paper, that's 10 liters, okay? And you might think, oh, that's not so bad, but we're talking about 1 piece of paper, 10 liters for 1 piece of paper. And then I always say to the learners, well, how many liters are in your exercise book of 72 pages? And then they're like, oh, yeah, 720 liters. And I'm like, yes, just think of how much water is in this classroom alone, just in exercise books. And then that comes to another point where you can talk about, well, how can we minimize that? Well, if we recycle paper, that means we don't have to grow as many trees in the first place. which means we don't have to just dig up as much grassland to grow those trees in the first place. So you can bring in all those kinds of conversations, why, for example, recycling will help, or using paper, a piece of paper on both sides, or trying to minimize photocopying, etc. Then the burger, this is a nice talking conversation. This one always surprises people, 2,500 liters. How is that the burger is 2,500 liters, yet you've got a plate or a serving of vegetables that is 45 liters? And then this whole brings in the whole big discussion around, well, what part of the burger is it that makes the burger so water intensive? And it's basically the meat. And if you have to think about what is required in terms of water to make that patty, well, there's a lot. Okay, first of all, if you're raising a calf from a calf, it's going to take 3 to 5 years, maybe 4 to 5 years before it's big enough, and then it gets killed. And during that time, it has to drink a lot of water and eat a lot of grass. If you think of what a cow does all day, all it does is eat grass, because grass is a very nutrient poor food. It has to eat a huge amount. So that's one thing, and it has to drink about 50, 60 liters of water a day. And then, of course, once it's killed in the abattoir, huge amounts of water are used. If we looked at that 2,500 liters of water, we could grow 40 times more beans, for example. Okay, and that one burger can only feed one person in the classroom, can't it? So that would be me if I wanted that burger, and the rest of this class would have to be hungry for the day. But instead, if I used that 2,500 liters of water to grow beans, I could grow 400 kilograms. And that 400 kilograms of beans would not just feed everyone for lunch today, but for every day for the next few months. So just to see those differences, okay? So, you know, you might be turning or having short showers or being very conservative with your water use at home, but if you're eating meat every day in South Africa or anywhere, you're actually blowing your water budget right out of the sky. And in a water scarce country where the water forecast is not looking great, that by 2030 we're going to be using more fresh water than we have, yeah, maybe we need to think about eating less of something and more of vegetables. And there are obviously health benefits as well. And then the liter of dairy milk, this is also one that is very surprising to many people, that for 1 liter of dairy, it's 628 liters of water is needed, versus the liter of soya milk, which is, sorry, where's my answer? 28 liters at the bottom there. Look at that difference, massive. Okay, it's huge. And yeah, there's lots of discussions about dairy, and actually dairy isn't as wonderful as people make it out to be, and it's all about marketing. And actually plant-based milks are better for you and better for the planet. So there's lots of discussion there to be had as well. So just that little activity in itself can really shift and enlighten and turn on lots of light bulbs, hopefully in you as well today, about things you might not have known, about, you know, water and water scarcity. And if we're really serious about water saving, we need to also look at our consumption of everything. So that example really is just, I just wanted to involve you in that, just as practical. And then I'm winding up now, but I think it's important with any environmental education intervention is to also, yeah, give schools recognition and where possible rewards. And that's the beauty of working with the framework that's established, is that generally there might be some funding behind it, and you can actually reward schools with prizes or prizes of money that can be used towards in enhancing and realizing some of the environmental projects. And through this recognition and rewards, having some kind of workshop or awards day where schools can meet each other, share and showcase what they've done, and get recognition and learn from their failures and obviously their successes. Yeah, so that's, I think, an important part. And then sharing it, okay? So sharing would happen at those kind of celebration events. And then, of course, with the Sustainable Schools program, it's really nice. Each school will have written up on the online platform their school environmental management plan, which they can also keep on file in the school office and share with other potential partners, whether that's environmental affairs or other funders potentially, or people that might help them with, you know, local people in their area that might help them with a project they're trying to work on. And also sharing through photos, and also for your own reporting purposes. One thing we do in our small team is that for every single visit that we do to a school, and this is really important, I think, we record everything that we do. We record what lesson we did, what we took to the school, what we said we would do for the next visit, what the school promised they would do, what tasks they would complete, how many learners there were, anything that we noticed at the school, like maybe if we were checking on their vegetable garden or their indigenous garden, how that was going. And we log everything. And that's very important also for reporting back to whoever you're reporting back to, whether it's your funder or whoever you work for. And then also what comes with this is the photographs. And then these are important, photos are obviously important for sharing on your social media platforms or your reports. And yeah, so that's another way of sharing, getting things into local newspapers, some good news stories. I think it helps, just to inspire people to do better as well. So whether it's on the newspaper or on your social media platforms. So we need more followers, please. Follow us, One Planet South Africa, and you might get some ideas from us. Equally important in part of the sharing part is also getting reflections from your teachers. These are also really important for your own evaluation and how a particular activity or lesson was received, if it was relevant. We always get teachers to try and write up or send us voice notes about a particular lesson. And here's an example of the Sustainable Schools is supporting us positively because it covers what is in our curriculum. Learners love it as it puts theory into practice. So that practical element is often why teachers love it. And learners learn more through practical. It has a positive impact as they are always actively involved in the learning process, and it helps them to become critical thinkers. And I think that's what we're also trying to do, get our learners to become critical thinkers and not just learn by rote out of the textbook like we all had to. Here's another comment. It integrates with subjects like natural science and has practical actions that help to care for our environment. And this kind of thing we wouldn't have, extracted. Our learners' pass rates have improved, particularly in NS, and which is natural science, and we have really understood complex topics like global warming and have been encouraged to think and make creative solutions. So very, very valuable. I mean, that if you share that with someone who might be helping you to fund your project, that can only help and convince them that what you're doing is really worthwhile. And as far as challenges are concerned, so everything that I've covered so far could be a challenge, but what I've covered, I hope would, if you're doing these kinds of things and kind of following those steps that I've mentioned, you will probably help to iron out challenges. So for example, schools that don't receive you well. So if your selection process in the beginning is quite strict, then you probably won't find yourself in a position where you have an unresponsive school. So I'm not going to go into challenges, talking about challenges, because hopefully if you're doing all these things, you won't have too many. There will be, of course, there always are. So in summary, this is what I'd say, have to just summarize for everything we've spoken about, or I've spoken about today, is make it fun, first and foremost. Make it something that schools want to be part of. And schools they have to want to participate. What is difficult if someone says you need to work with those 3 schools, and sometimes it just doesn't work, okay? And that's really down to an individual basis. It's about personalities, it's about relationships. So you really want schools that want to make a difference. You want those ones to work with. Having a framework, okay, whether it's eco schools, sustainable schools, or something like EduPlant or Water Explorer, it doesn't matter what it is, but that helps you to focus your support and also give the schools direction. Talk to the curriculum, okay, make sure that you are talking this teachers talk and that you show that what you're doing is actually helping them to do their job. And then using a variety of methods to make it interesting and fun. And then you to come prepared with action-packed lessons. And then importantly, to recognize and reward where you can and to share and show what you've been doing. So it's really nice for me to, for example, share with you guys today about what we're doing. And hopefully this inspires you to, engage with schools if you're working with schools in meaningful ways that can actually make a difference at the same time. So thanks very much. I've got to the end of my presentation, and I'm very happy to take some questions.
Hi, Bridget. I'd like to thank you for your very insightful presentation. It got us thinking about primarily our water usage. I think we're doing a lot of things. I think we think we're environmentally aware, and then we realize that we're also just using a lot of water. I'm guilty with the bottle of milk, so I have to rethink my food choices. But I'm going to open the floor now for the Q&A. I see there's some questions on the chat, and I see some hands, but I'd like to start with Asima. Asima, I don't know if you're comfortable to unmute and ask your question, or would you prefer that I read it out?
Oh, yes, if you could, yeah, just if I'm just thinking, I can't see the questions.
Should I read it out? So I have a couple of questions from Asima. The first one is, don't you think that environmental education would be more successful if the government actually got involved and emphasis or imposed teachers to start teaching from grade R to tertiary?
It would be. It's a big wish, and I think behind the scenes there've been many people in the environmental education network across South Africa that have been pushing for this sort of overarching environmental education approach. So it's just very, very hard to break through all the different layers of the education system. And just in my time, I'm just thinking. There is improvement, at least it's getting recognition, but that would be the ultimate. And until the people at the top see how vital it is and insist that it is something that is that it starts with teacher training for a start, at the very start, that it's in teacher training. It's got to change at so many levels. But in the meantime, I think this gives space for other NGOs like ourselves and Nature Connect, WESA, all of those people to try and keep that pressure. And if we keep that pressure up, I think every effort helps. We're not gonna move the big elephants in the room, unfortunately.
Just a follow-up question on that. She also asked that. How do you get the government to see reason in getting involved in environmental education? Because although they say that it's part of CAPS, it actually doesn't get enforced.
Yeah, so that's where I think it has to change at sort of a teacher training level. So if teachers are, if they during their training, if they are taught and do modules around environmental education and to be shown where those links exist between different subjects. I mean, the good thing is that the one good thing is that the CAPS, there are environmental learning outcomes in there. It's just that during the teacher training, they kind of brushed over. So I think it really starts at the teacher training level. And then while we wait for teacher training to shift and change to include that, there's a space for all of us to try and show teachers those connections. And that's what we're trying to do in the meantime. And I know it's only a drop in the ocean. But They certainly know about us. The Department of Basic Education know about eco schools and sustainable schools and Water Explorer and that. But I think they also so overrun with other more pressing issues, until they sort out, the classrooms and the number of staff at schools and the food and the feeding schemes, all those issues that keep on rearing their head. Environmental matters are always going to be sort of at the end of the chain. So we just have to keep doing it. And we've got best practice examples in place. So when it comes to scaling up, we're all going to be there ready to help and share.
Yeah, I think I'll be alternating between other people and Asima's questions because they follow each other. I don't know, Dr. O, do you have a question before I go to Blaine?
Hi, Bridget, once again, you blew me away, like always. I've known you now for many years, and your program is just getting stronger and stronger from the days from eco schools down at Ndumu to where you are now. Thank you for making a difference in the school learners' lives and just keeping on and reinforcing. And I am trying to eat more pulses, which is not easy. But yes, I am more aware. And wonder bags, I've got so many wonder bags now at the moment, and we're trying to get the community more involved in wonder bags and solar cooking and that, but it's changing a mindset, and that's where it comes down. We can educate, but to try and change adult community in starting to cook using solar is not easy. But I'm just so happy to see a lot of my students online, because I've been getting messages all morning saying the comrades have gone into the residences and forced them now to strike. But we got at least more than half of my students online. But Bridget, from my side, I would like to thank you for just staying positive and just from all the good work that you are doing. But I would love to hear what my students have to say. And I'm glad Assie has asked the questions about caps, because that's one thing that we have to still enforce. And you say it's one of the wishes that we can start getting that changed and being more positive about it.
Thanks, Cheryl. That's such kind words. Thank you. And I mean, you've been an amazing inspiration to that Ndumo community, and I know to your students. So yeah, just think of how many hundreds of students you've influenced through sharing this kind of approach to environmental education activities and implementation.
Blaine, you can ask your question.
Hi, Bridget, thank you. Sorry, man, I just wanted to ask regarding, so if we use the jeans, for example, I mean, if you look at our uniform at UT, the basic prescribed uniform is wearing jeans. And now a lot of time we go into these areas wearing jeans and stuff like that, and now you're teaching them that jeans use so much water. Do you not get kids that are kind of like put off by the message and by the lesson, seeing people that are supposed to be conservation wise and water wise and stuff like that, sort of doing the things that you're teaching them is not great?
No, it's a good point. But I suppose it's not about not wearing jeans. We all have to wear something. So my point there would be to say, look, and this wouldn't be at a rural school because they're not going to have, they might not even have a pair of jeans. But if you were at a resource school, you know, how many jeans do you actually need? And actually, maybe it's not about not wearing jeans. It's about having one pair or two pairs of jeans that are really good. And like then, and it's true, I've got jeans that I've had for basically, or trousers that I've had for 20 years. And people laugh at them because they're all patched. You know, I've got all sorts of patches on my clothes because I don't want to, I love them, number one. And two, I'm like, well, until they fall off me, they are still wearable. So I think the point is, it's not about not wearing jeans. It's about like, how many do I need? How many do I really need? And when the jeans are too small, then somebody else can wear them, which I think is quite an obvious thing in South Africa. Most people pass down their clothes that are too big or too small. And you might not want to take the jeans as an example. You could take another example of a t-shirt, which is about 2,500 liters to make. So, you know, everyone has to wear clothes, whether it's jeans or t-shirts. It's not about not wearing this stuff. It's about how much you have. And, you know, maybe it is good to have one pair of jeans that lasts 10 years, then have bought a whole lot of cheap pants from Pep or Mr. Price, and you've had to buy 5 or 6 or 7 over 10 years versus one for 10 years. I think that's kind of the key here. But yeah, I think you have to be very aware of who you're sharing the lesson with and make sure you contextualize it. And, you know, you don't really want to make people feel bad about something, but you just want to make them think about things that maybe aren't obvious.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Another question from Asima. They say one of the SDGs says no poverty. However, we sometimes find people living below survival. How could we combat that?
So certainly, I think with most of these school environmental education programs, one of the big things most schools tend to pick up is food gardens where possible. And it's certainly like probably one of the commonalities in all the schools I work. So I think starting with a project like that is really important. And a lot of the schools that I work in do have learners that, you know, indigent learners that maybe don't have a stable homes or are, you know, child-headed households. So those food gardens at school become really important because a lot of that excess, the teachers are always telling me that they give them to the learners. So I think that's key. And also through a food garden or a vegetable garden, you can, it's not just about growing stuff, it's about involving learners and teaching them how to do it themselves, and then using that as a tool for learning, whether it's about ecosystems or maths or whatever. So yeah, certainly, you know, one can't just eradicate poverty, and I don't think we can as environmental educators. It's not our responsibility to eradicate poverty. We just can't. We can't do everything, but we can help to empower people through starting a garden to assist with that. Thanks, but a good question.
Yeah, the second one, then I'll go to Anna's question. She says, with the 5 T's, why is emotions not involved? Because I feel it's one of the important elements in making a difference in environmental education.
No, I'm with you. I think emotion is very, very important. And maybe it wasn't written out as a word on that 5 T's, but I certainly included in my lessons, emotion and feeling passionate and connected is really, really important, because why do I care about something? Because you are emotionally involved or you are connected. So yeah, don't get me wrong, I think that's vital. If you're emotionally connected, you are far more likely to act and take action on something. So yeah, it is in that 5 T's. It might not have been explicitly written, but in the talk, feel, touch, all of that, it could come up in that inner circle. Thank you for raising that.
Yes. A question from Anna, then I'll go to Dr. O. Anna asks that, what impact does the program or project have? Is there progress made at the schools?
Sorry, so the question was, what is the impact?
What impact does the program or the project have? Is there progress being made at the schools?
Okay, so the impact, yeah, so with environmental education, it's often very hard to measure impact, because you essentially, you're trying to change minds and approaches and behaviors, which are often very difficult to measure. But that is quite an important part to try and measure in any environmental education intervention. So that's why, okay, the photographs. Okay, so if you are doing like a food garden or an indigenous garden, or setting up tippy taps or whatever it might be, you know, or doing a cleanup, you have a before and after, so you can see the impact. You can actually see the change. But then as far as minds, that's why evaluation is an important part. So to get those reflections from teachers and also from learners. And those reflections, yeah, we're quite calculated about trying to capture some of those things, because it's the stories that are more important than necessarily the statistics. So hearing that girl, for example, set up some tippy taps at home, to me, that is an impact. Or some of the girls at the one school then went home and built their own solar ovens with materials they had. That is an impact. So it's, yeah, so it's very important to capture those things as far as possible.
Dr. O, we can take your question. Mute.
There, on there. Okay, it's just a matter of unmuting. Thanks, Prudence. Bridget, what you touched on in a nutshell is the head, hands, and heart.
Yes.
It's not all about cognitive knowledge. And Arla's put it in such basic language when he wrote his book, that it's actually more about the heart and hands-on. So actually changing, and that's where Azzy came in with the emotions. So if we start working on how the feelings come in and how one starts becoming hands-on, whether it's designing tippy taps or designing little solar cookers, that child has learned knowledge, why it's important, but they've physically gone out to go and make the difference, and they become proactive. So no, thank you. It's just a comment which I just wanted for the students just to link in to the 3 H's, the head, hands, and heart, and how they should be in balance. And you cannot just work on knowledge on its own. You have to put it into action and get those emotions and feelings out there.
Yes, thanks for that, Cheryl. A very, very important thing, and thanks for making that link for your students.
Yeah.
I'll take a question from the chat again from Asima, and then I'll come to you, Andy. She says, with solar energy, isn't LED a very, or if more detrimental than other chemicals? And if we don't dispose it properly, it could also contribute to pollution. And would you say we're facing a climate change, or we see it as that because we now have people who have moved into those areas? Because it's the same storm of flood with the same amount of strength, just that the only difference is that we now have people in the way. So I think it's twofold, it's 2 questions.
Yes, certainly about LEDs and or renewables and alternatives to the energy sources we're using today. There's always going to be a negative impact to some degree, but it's about weighing out which is worse. So yes, you know, LEDs have to be disposed of in a sensible way, but so have all those other, to be honest, all the other the old light bulbs as well. I mean, they're not without their chemicals, and you know, it's not just now because LEDs are bad that we, you know, are chemically bad, that we must be worried about it. Sure, we must be, but you know, we're at this point where we actually don't have too many options. We've actually got to weigh out the better of 2 not so good things. or you know, everything has an impact, number one. And then yeah, I think, yeah, climate change, climate crisis, or whatever, it's not about changing the climate, it's about changing humanity. So it's the whole approach that yeah, just humans are just out of touch with nature. We've lost, there's a disconnect, there's an absolute disconnect. And yeah, it's massive. And I know people are critical, and sometimes I must say in my work, I sometimes feel very despondent, because it feels like you're going one step forward and then 1,000 million steps are taken back by one person's bad decision sitting at the top. He wants to open more coal-fired power stations, you know, or start mining for more coal, when we know we've got the science. So yeah, I think if you can make small changes locally, that's the only thing that we can do. And if you lead by example, practice what you preach. That's the other thing I didn't have in my slides. Practice what you preach. Don't talk about solar ovens and stuff if you're not doing it yourself. If you're not trying it out yourself, you're not doing it. If you're not trying to eat lower on the food chain, if you're not trying to reduce your water I mean, no one's perfect, but if we as environmental educators aren't actually doing the things ourselves, how can we ever expect anybody else to? And I think if you're authentic and you're passionate, and as Cheryl said, head, heart, hands, then, you know, yeah, that is your best chance of trying to convince others and get more people to love what we love, which is planet Earth.
Thank you, Bridget. Andy, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, and then Amo will come next.
Oh, there we go. I've conquered the tech. Sorry, that's what happens when you get middle-aged, isn't it? Bridget, thank you very much. Just a quick question from me, probably. You mentioned earlier on, I think, Indigenous knowledge and how you might be able to tap into that. And of course, it links to the questions we've had so far, because that wonderful depth of knowledge has evolved from a close connection with nature and the environment. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you see that as an opportunity, maybe as well with the students, but also to engage throughout the depth of the community, to tap into some of the wisdom that maybe our elders have that often feel ignored because it's not in a book called science.
That's right. Thanks for bringing that up. Indigenous knowledge is a wonderful way to angle environmental activities as well, because we just have to look at our forefathers, and they lived far more sustainably than we are today. And also in terms of CAPS, there is a push for sharing Indigenous and heritage knowledge. So there's a number of opportunities within our curriculum to highlight those you know, those practices in the past. So, for example, around nutrition, for example, there's stunning examples of practical things that we can do around nutrition and the way people used to eat and the way they eat today, by just simply looking at imifinos. And everyone on the chat today will know imifinos are your edible weeds and things that our gogos have been cooking, you know, for a few hundred years before KFC and Nando's and our fast food era arrived. And those foods go a long way. If you look at, for example, your standard utkatolo and your ushugayani and amaranthus and stuff like that, those blackjacks and nettles and all of those kinds of weeds, heritage foods, heritage weeds, actually have higher nutrient content than your store-bought cabbages and spinaches. And they're free foods. They are there readily available for you to pick. So it's reminding us about where we came from and the beauty of that knowledge and how it actually served us and served us much better than our addiction today to high fat, high sugar diets that are killing ourselves and killing the planet at the same time. So I think there's huge value and scope around heritage practices, Indigenous knowledge or heritage practices. Thank you for raising that, Andy. That's really like a really powerful way to also engage more people.
Thank you, Bridget. Amo, before you ask a question, Dr. O, how are we looking for time?
And the guys, the times are fun because the second lecturer is not actually around, so we can carry on all morning. Prudence, I don't know about Bridget's timing, but yeah, Bridget, whenever you can or whenever you need to go, then I understand. But yes, we're good for time. We're good for time.
Great. Okay.
Bridget, can you do 10 more minutes?
Yes, absolutely. That's fine. I'd be happy to if there's more questions and ideas.
Okay, Amo, you can ask your question.
Oh, he's got a question.
Hello guys, can you see me?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I'm experiencing some launching. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to thank the speaker for working with the kids and educating them. And by so doing, Ms. Bridget, you're actually planting a seed in them. That
Amo, sorry, may you please speak a little bit louder?
Oh, I just wanted to thank our speaker today for working with kids and educating them. And by so doing, you are actually planting a seed in them that will enable them to care and love for the environment. And as you say that we learn better when we observe and try it out ourselves. And what I can say is that what we have taught those kids, they will never forget. They will never forget it in their lives. So thank you.
Thank you. I didn't hear all of that. I don't know if there was a question in there, but
No, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to thank.
oh, well, thank you so much. I'm glad it was enjoyed. Thank you.
There's 3 more questions. One question from Babalo. She says, thank you for a very insightful talk. Now, my question is, after recognizing success in interacting with these schools, have you ever thought of exposing or shadowing a few learners from the schools to careers in conservation? Maybe even use that as rewarding the schools?
That's a lovely, I love your idea of thinking to, you know, to do the next step, which is to encourage learners, young learners into, professions that have an environmental angle, perhaps. Look, to be honest, most of the schools we work with are primary schools. So we're not at that point where we're advising learners on particular careers and stuff like that. It's a bit out of our scope, but I know that Nature Connect, who we partner with, they have a very strong focus on finding those learners in high schools that have an inclination and have real aptitude and passion for environmental things, and helping to nurture them and advance their opportunities through connecting them with tertiary education opportunities. So those programs exist, and I think they're very, very important, because most school leavers don't know where to start. I mean, that's sort of generic for all school leavers, but hey, why not, if you've got a group of enthusiastic environmental ones, kind of steer them in a direction. But through my years, so we tend to work with primary schools more, just because they're easier to work with, and they prefer, I mean, primary school learners are the ones that are more enthusiastic, to be quite honest. But in my time in working in this field, I have, it's lovely to have those stories of where I've known learners for over 10 years that have passed through environmental clubs and etc. And then they've gone into careers, like a couple of that I know have studied environmental science and stuff like that. So that's really rewarding.
The next question is from Lorraine. She says, what kind of impact assessment tools do you use in these schools?
Okay, so for every, we have basically have a school visit sheet, which is an A4 page that we document what we did at the school, and capture things like number of learners, teachers, etc. So we have that, and then we transfer it onto, we have got like a simple, it's basically an Excel sheet of where we log every single activity, and then we also list what action was followed through with and what action project was done. So then at the end of it all, I can count up, so from a statistical purpose, we can count up the number of learners that we engaged with, number of visits, number of schools, number of tippy taps that were set up, number of gardens that were worked in, etc., etc. So the statistics, the hard and fast data we capture just by making sure that we all fill in our school log. And then what we also do at different points during the year, sometimes it might just be after a lesson, or at the end of the year, usually every second year, we do like a teacher survey, a teacher learner survey, where we ask and get feedback. We have like an online survey, like a MailChimp survey, where we ask teachers specific questions about what we've covered over the year and their reflections, and they generally are anonymous, so that, you know, we get true feedback, not just sort of biased feedback. So we don't, so we use surveys and then just our school visit, in-school visit tool. So that's what we really use, and then from that we'll be able to draw out statistics and then also the anecdotal stories of change as well.
We have one more question from Andy. Andy, I don't know if you'd like to unmute and say your question.
It's a bit of a cheeky one, but I've just had a cup of coffee, so I'm off now. In classroom or out in the natural environment, where do you think you have best impact with your sessions? I know it all overlaps. But...
Yes, oh no, definitely outdoors. I think for most of the part, and I mean, it's, I think any school, children spend too much time in that classroom. So any chance to take them outside, I do. And that's, you know, they really love it. The only thing that I really need in the classroom is something to write on. Sometimes you just need a board to kind of write something up on. And then the classroom's useful if you just need them to focus and write something down or think about something and reflect on it. And then the other thing the classroom's good for is if you have some visuals to show them. So sometimes we do show them photos or a short PowerPoints or something. So that's where the classroom space is certainly useful. But if I had to choose, I would choose to go outside.
Yeah, it's a loaded question from a guy who used to bounce off the walls in a classroom at school, just dying to get out and do stuff. So thank you.
No, that's good. And I know there was that one great, I can't remember, British educator, I can't remember his name now, but he always used to say, people forget that children don't just have heads, they have bodies too, and they need to move their bodies.
Oh yeah, our education system's forgotten that here in the UK, but let's not get into that one. Okay, thanks ever so much. Cheers, guys.
No, thanks for all your good questions. And thank you for getting me out here and allowing me to share. It's very nice. And just to chat to all your students. And yeah, it's been a great pleasure.
So thank you everyone for your really great questions. We are now come to the end of the Q&A, and I'll hand over to Aisha to do the closing.
Thank you, Prudence. Thank you so much, Bridget. I think not just myself, it was such a thought-provoking talk today. Really, it's time for some self-reflection. Like you said, you need to live, breathe, eat, everything conservation. We're studying it now, but yeah, practice what you preach. I really like that. I saw that Johan was in and Kirsten, so I would close. I just don't know if they want to say something.
Aisha, I think you said everything. Just
Okay.
a huge thank you to our presenter today. It was super interesting, and I'd love to see the engagement from the students. Thank you very much.
Okay, so while the screen is also out there, if you want to just see the, if you want to scan the QR code, that's on the screen for a bit, and then we're going to close floor. Thank you so much, Bridget.
Oh, no, thank you. It was a great
Thanks.
delight and pleasure for me. Yes, you've all inspired me to keep going. So, thanks.
No,
And it's so nice
likewise,
to know there's another 80 or so people out there that are interested in the same thing I'm interested in. So that's awesome.
Yes.